Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our FIU and DC event this morning. It's a pleasure to have a great turnout at 11 a.m. on this Wednesday, September 9th. I'm Eric Feldman, Associate Director at FIU in Washington, DC, and I'm reporting live from FIU in Washington, DC here in the nation's capital for this morning's event, How Strategic Communications Campaigns Promote Products and Policies. A few words on what FIU and DC is for those of you who may not have attended one of our events before or be familiar with us as a team. We are here in the nation's capital and we achieve a few goals for the university. First is what we call solutions, and this is our more traditional government relations and federal advocacy, where we work with members of Congress and federal agencies to make sure FIU's priority research programs and student access programs, financial aid and things of that nature, have legislative support, funding support, programmatic support at the federal level. Our idea exchange set of programming is where we position FIU as a thought, conversation, and solution leader. These events on the idea exchange side are not just even for students or faculty. We convene those groups as well as think tank researchers, advocacy group leaders, federal appointees to discuss everything from environmental issues to new technologies on the defense and veterans side of things, and Latin America policy, among other things. And what you're experiencing today is part of our talent lab. Our talent lab is all of our programming for our students and alumni that is geared at internship and career success. And all of our work in helping place all of you in internships and career roles here. We promote a lot of internships through our newsletter. I know some of our panelists today have internships, so we're glad that you're here. Another key element of the Talent Lab is our fly-in seminars. We're well known for our 3-day in-person experiences in DC around a variety of different topics. Those are on this semester virtually, and virtually they will be as amazing as ever. We've done one virtual fly-in already, I can attest to that. 2 different fly-ins are open for applications right now, and our super easy website, flyin.fiu.edu, has the information on both of them. First, applications due this week for our flying in on the future of equity in health and beyond. It's taking a look at how both the pandemic and the 2020 election are influencing efforts to get towards greater equity in a variety of social areas: health, education, economic mobility, and intersection between those things. We also are doing one with FIU's Black Student Union. They're hosting it. Where they're lead partners in developing the itinerary. That one is called, it's not here on the flyer, it's called Breaking Generational Barriers to Black Leadership, exploring that topic from both the governmental and entrepreneurial perspectives with a variety of Black business owners and representatives of agencies and organizations that support minority-owned businesses and other social equity causes. So you can visit flyin.fiu.edu for both of those. The applications are due soon. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's panel guests. First up, I'll introduce Tom Nagle. Tom is a longtime marketing leader and innovator, passionate about developing programs that transform markets and drive positive business outcomes. For 10 years, Tom was the head of marketing for the Got Milk campaign, which was based out of the International Dairy Foods Association, and has worked in market research and advertising firms, including J. Walter Thompson, Earl Palmer Brown, and Ray Kirk Van Sant. In 2007, he partnered with Gene Statler to found Statler Nagle, a DC-based strategic communications firm that he co-runs and is representing today. He holds a bachelor's in business and management from the University of Maryland, has received numerous international awards for marketing, creativity, and effectiveness. Also want to give a quick shout out to an FIU DC-based alumna here today, Anna Morales. Anna works on Tom's team at Statler Nagle and helped us put this together. And is a great friend to FIU up here. Anna, thank you for your help and thanks for being here. Brad Bowman, on the topic of FIU alumni, is an FIU alumnus. He's also the founder and CEO of Fireside Campaigns, where he manages the business as well as the PR and crisis communications practices. He's the former executive director of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, where he oversaw its legislative, communications, and political operations for over 80 members of Congress. He has also been the communications director for various members of the House and congressional campaigns. He's developed communications and PR strategy For electoral and issue campaigns at every level, having worked as senior advisor for presidential campaigns, party committees, large progressive organizations, labor unions, resistance groups, and advocacy orgs, he holds a bachelor's in political science from our FIU and a master's in political management from the George Washington University. And also super glad to have here Mischa Sindyukov, a consultant in APCO's Worldwide Advocacy and Campaigns Practice Group located in the Washington, D.C. office. She specializes in media relations, public affairs campaigns, international new business events, and corporate communications for global corporations. Her clients include Fortune 500 companies, law firms, multinational companies in food, retail, and commodity spaces. Mischa assists clients from across several regions, including Latin America, Middle East, and Europe, in the global marketing team. So she has a lot of global experience. She's led communications programming for 700 plus employees across 30 plus offices. She also has some cool sports experience, having done communications work for the Pursuit Sports Group for professional financial consulting firm for professional athletes. She's worked for the Republican Jewish Coalition, originally from Russia. She speaks Israel. She speaks English, Hebrew, Russian, and Spanish. Very cool. She's a graduate of American University here in Washington, D.C. Another shout out, and then we'll get going. One reason we're super glad that Mischa is here, she has formerly supervised an FIU intern, Valentina Acosta, who I believe is on the call. So Valentina, thank you for joining us. And Mischa, thank you for having been a great mentor to an FIU intern. We hope we have more. All right, so time for our moderated discussion on the issue. I will encourage those who are here today to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know your FIU affiliation, why you're here today, why did this topic interest you, and feel free to ask questions anytime in the chat. So we'll get to questions near the end. You might ask a question more interesting than the one I had next, and I might ask it. I'll call on people to ask questions after they've been in the chat or combine some of the questions. And before we get going for good, I would like to give a great thank you to FIU's College of Communication, Architecture, and the Arts, CARTA, for helping promote this event. And I would like to welcome all CARTA students and faculty members who are joining us today. We appreciate that support because we have a great turnout this morning. So I'm going to start with the biggest picture question here and ask kind of all three of you to respond briefly. And the next question probably have a more in-depth answer. But so we have some alignment here. Simply, what is a strategic communications campaign? How do you define your work? And how might it be different from or intersect with other similar things like PR and marketing, in any order?
Who wants to go first?
Volunteering.
By all means. So I think that when we look at strategic communications, it is differentiated from a lot of the work that you see in advertising, in that we have a different set of goals in mind other than just simply buying a product. What we are ultimately attempting to do is use communications either through paid or through earned means in order to affect something that's happening in the public arena. Sometimes that might be, campaigns like either issue campaigns or political campaigns where we are advocating for or against a ballot initiative or a candidate. Sometimes it is a communications campaign that is based around legislative action, that we are trying to influence members of a state legislature in Florida, up in Tallahassee, or in another state capital, or in Washington, D.C. in Congress, in order to get folks to do something that needs to be done in a specific piece of legislation. So when we're looking at strategic communications, it intersects with a lot of other traditional communications operations, whether it be advertising or whether it be earned media and public relations, because each of those tend to be a part of the overall structure of how we're building a strategic communications campaign. But in general, it's more about kind of influencing the environment in order to achieve some sort of a public outcome.
Yeah, if I can add to that, a really easy way to think about it is like if you have a can of Coke, if you work for a marketing firm, you're probably creating advertisements telling people, buy this can of Coke. If you're working in more traditional public relations, you're probably, putting out press releases and doing more traditional communications to encourage people to buy Coke. But strategic communications, you're kind of looking at the environment around you and thinking, okay, well, what can we do to make sure that this Coke can even be sold to begin with? So that could be sugar legislation, aluminum cans, like what is the environment around us doing and how can we change it so that selling this Coke or, having this Coke even exist can be possible.
Well, Mischa, you have really teed me up because we have actually worked for the Can Manufacturers Association and the High Fructose Corn Syrup.
Wow, perfect.
Well, I want to follow up on what you said about that actually, because I'm not sure I believe that communications campaigns are strategic. And I want to say they are strategic, of course. They have very finely crafted messaging strategies, et cetera. But to me, one of the things I often talk to clients about is what I call the got milk fallacy, which is you just have the perfect message and a great campaign that's famous and seems the coolest campaign ever, that everything will get better. Everything will change the way you want it to change. You'll get the votes you need, you'll get the sales you need, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things we talk to our clients about all the time is, well, maybe. The Got Milk campaign by itself, though very famous and very successful on advertising terms, didn't drive big increases in milk sales. It wasn't until we crafted the strategy all the way down through the value chain so that we were not just running great ads, but we had all the other communication elements in place, right? The social media, the PR, the earned media, the owned, et cetera, all of that. Plus, we integrated with the retail chains. We integrated all the way down through to the ground level, so that we had a strategy. The real strategy was, how do all the pieces come together? The messaging, the communications channels, the retail delivery of the product, et cetera, which really ties to what you were saying, Mischa. You can't just hope you run an ad and everything turns out well. You have to take care of all that other business. And what we find, and I'm sure Brad and Mischa are probably more expert about this than I am, that's true on the policy side too. We've run and created multiple policy campaigns. So you can have a great message, really perfect message, but if it's not tied to how you develop grassroots and grass tops mobilization and how you get people to vote, they get out the vote effort, all this other kind of stuff, if it's not tied to how you build relationships with community groups, et cetera, then it's just a nice message and it doesn't pay off. And so to me, that notion of what's a strategic campaign about, it means how do you pull all those things together so they're one coherent whole. And in fact, I won't get into this at the moment, but that's how we measure them too. If you look at some of the best measurement tools, they measure all you can only really measure the full impact of the campaign and then try to pry apart what all the various elements do. So that's just at least an opening.
It sounds like campaigns then sometimes include more than communications. Tom, I think I know from Anna that some of your campaigns involve associations for an industry which are managed a part of it, and I see Mischa and Brad nodding. So maybe we can shift gears and talk a little bit more about the things that are maybe not explicitly communications that might be part of these campaigns, the surprising scope of some of these campaigns.
Well, thanks. I'll start off on that, and then my colleagues may jump in and add to it. I think that from our experience, and we do work for a lot of trade associations, and so what that essentially is a group of companies. So Got Milk was funded by 125 milk companies. That's pretty much all of them. Numbers changed since then, but the campaign we did for the can manufacturers, make food and beverage cans, was funded by all the companies that make cans. There's only about 6 of those actually. And so we bring them together and they work together to achieve a single shared set of goals. But I think in terms of what's there, here's the metaphor I think that really works well is the iceberg. You know, the top of the iceberg is only usually 20% of it. and the rest is under the water, and that's what sinks the ships. On a positive note, though, the best campaigns that are the most effective are like icebergs. In other words, the comms part you see. Everybody sees the ads, everybody sees the social media, the PR and all that. What they don't see is all the stuff underneath. That relates to the stuff I mentioned before about getting relationships going with all your distributors or all your intermediaries that are at the state and regional and local level. It involves research and analytics. A lot of times when we work with these companies, we discover that there's big chunks of knowledge that the industry doesn't have collectively. And so we have to do the research or the analytics to fill out a full understanding of the marketplace and the dynamics of it. It can involve market testing of ideas. One of the things that we find in the trade association world is it's an attractive proposition to industry groups and companies because they're going to tackle things that none of them can afford to do by themselves. They're going to do the kind of research or testing. Here's a crazy example. In the Got Milk campaign, no one would have ever seen this, but we actually funded all the initial tests of how to put those cool plastic single serves through vending machines. And that involved working with the companies that make the vending machines. It involved working with vending distributors and companies. It involved working with locations where vending machines hang out and all that. But we put all that together, did the initial testing and analysis of how well that would work. And then the companies went off and did whatever they do, and Nestle jumped on it. And of course, they're all over America today. But I bring that up because it's just an example of all the stuff below the water that you would never see that turn great communications into business outcomes or policy outcomes.
Yeah, no, I want to double down on what Tom just said. I think that, his metaphor of the iceberg is apt. 90% of the work that goes into a successful strategic communications operation is doing your politics right. Whether you're doing it on behalf of a product or set of products, or whether you're doing it on behalf of a set of issues, your ability to help steer large groups of other communicators in the direction of all speaking with one voice, or otherwise kind of expressing concepts together, is ultimately where your success or failure in a strategic communications operation go. Right now, whether it be on the electoral side, where, Fireside Campaigns is working with, individual big, party apparatuses, or whether we're working on the issue side with labor unions, or with our work with, pro-voter space folks. So much of the work that we end up doing is really in conversation with folks and saying, what's happening a week out from an election, 2 weeks out from the election, 3 weeks out from the election? What do we need to be communicating and talking about in each of those weeks? And really, through the process of consensus, coming up with what everybody thinks that we should be talking about according to the plan, and then building out the amount of money that everybody's going to be spending on it, how we're going to be communicating it together.
Brad, can I jump on that for a second? Because you brought up something else that I think is so important, which is that is so, for us in our work, that has been so consistently true, which is whatever the clients are spending, whether it's a trade association or some ad hoc group or a policy group, one of the real keys to success is getting what we call adoption and amplification by others, right? And you can multiply your impact by 5 times easily if you get others to adopt not just your brand, because sometimes that doesn't matter, just your message, your core message in their own terms. And so, and a lot of our work is for companies who are brand marketers, and it's very hard to say to them, no, we're not trying to build a brand here. We're trying to build a coherent message through a whole bunch of other people. They can do what they want with it as long as they got the core message in it. And so that idea of getting adoption and amplification by others is so enormously powerful.
Yeah, Tom, I feel like you're spot on about, marketers not always understanding the value and kind of sometimes saying, I'm not looking for a marketing campaign. And you have to take a step back and be like, this isn't a marketing campaign. We're trying to reach out to those, third-party validators that are going to be able to voice their opinions and get out there and kind of amplify your message. And like you said, it starts with research, it starts with market testing, but then sometimes you'd be surprised because the client might want one thing, but realistically, the messages they think resonate with people, they don't sometimes. And you have to go back and explain to them and kind of show why what they're trying to do might not be working. And perhaps that's one of the most challenging parts because, especially in DC, people will assume, well, all Republicans think this, all Democrats, all progressives want this. And that's just not the case because there's so many different groups and they all need different messaging and different information.
That's right. Even on like the left and yeah, I mean, I'm a big progressive. My firm does very progressive work. We've got, labor unions, environmental groups, civic action organizations, voting rights groups, and civil rights organizations all on retainer. And, so many of those folks have very, very different perspectives on the world, have very, very different mindsets of what they want to be talking about. And that's just in one little sliver of one little side of the partisan universe. All of them, at the end of the day, if they're engaged in a battle in a state capitol, we do so much work to say, hey, listen, and this is to Tom's point about getting people to drive messages. Hey, we understand that you have a very carefully honed way in which you communicate to your audience. We just really want you to say these 5 words or really present it in this fashion. Do it however you feel comfortable. But the important thing is that through the process of having all of these different groups across all of these different issue organizations speaking roughly the same, concepts, it's embedding in people's minds the importance, and it's ultimately changing people's opinions.
Mischa, I know you have a lot of experience in globally oriented communication, and Brad, I know that your area of practice includes crisis communications. Can each of you speak a little bit to those sub areas of what to be mindful for when talking about global issues and Brad, crisis situations?
Yeah, absolutely. With global communications, I would say something that people often, oversee is like the cultural context. If you're communicating to people in Germany versus to people in Colombia, like the messaging is going to be very different, and something that you think will resonate with Americans doesn't always make the same cultural, it has different cultural implications and people might react very differently to what you're saying. So I would say that's one of the main things. And often global clients have preconceived notions of what DC is like. They will think, oh, just go to the White House, or, oh, just go to the Hill, knock on the door. Like they'll open the door and talk to you. And it's like, well, if you're an international client, we have to, register publicly with you. We can't just go knocking on a congressman's door and assume that this guy is going to be really excited to talk about whatever issue you're presenting. So you have to be a lot more strategic a lot of times. And that comes with its own challenges, because if you're communicating for someone, whether it's, let's say, for example, last year we worked for the government of Germany, and they had a campaign that was all about US-American friendships. And the goal was to kind of go past these traditional diplomatic channels and kind of used public diplomacy to connect with people. And it was fascinating because, they would just say, oh, well, like everyone in the Midwest is going to be so excited about this. There's a huge population of German ancestry. And it's going back to the client and saying, well, look, you're saying this, but the reality is that people can have all kinds of ideas about Germany and they're not always positive. So, we had to kind of fulfill multiple challenges. A is what the client was thinking Americans think. B is what Americans think of a country like Germany. And then C is kind of the Capitol Hill environment and, their lobbyists their bigger teams, the corporations, German corporations located in the US, and we had to take into consideration what every single group was saying and come up with a coherent message that worked for everyone. So we ended up coming up with a campaign idea called Wunderbar Together, which means wonderful together. And it worked really well because it was German and American, and it was kind of that intersection that works really well. So that's a little bit about international campaigns.
Thank you.
When it comes to crisis communications, and it's a very high-powered, very exciting place to get a specialty. Let's just start from the fact that it is not exactly what you would think from watching shows like Scandal, even though to toot my own horn for a second, I have been known by the right as the living Olivia Pope due to some of my work in crisis communications for the left. It's not like that at all. In fact, what we start with is the understanding that crisis communications is about understanding that every crisis is completely different. There is absolutely no way to prepare for for anything from the moment that a crisis is brought to your attention. And so instead of trying to solve crises by interjecting ourselves in the specifics of the problem, the way that we actually do crisis communications is about process. We train our clients to understand that there is a way of looking at crisis that gets you to an answer. And that what we ultimately attempt to do is create an environment where from the starting place, once a crisis is identified, we are bringing the exact right people together to make a decision. We are bringing together the right people in order to inform that decision making. So the experts who can adequately tell the decision makers exactly what's happened. We're piecing together a definitive timeline of everything that happened in a detailed oriented way so that what we can do is poke holes in our opponent's messaging and make sure that folks understand exactly what happened according to the facts in order to ensure that folks can't infer what a problem is. We're ascertaining legal liability and figuring out exactly whether an entity or a person is under a legal problem, because then we need to take most of our answers and most of our direction from lawyers who are going to be responsible for defending somebody in court rather than just doing the sort of work that needs to be done in the court of public opinion. We then figure out all of this information together, and then at that moment we say, okay, do we have enough information to decide whether we're going to act or just monitor? Because one of the things to remember is that some crises don't even need to be acted on. Sometimes what people interpret as a crisis is something that, because they are just very nervous about the situation, is something that in the grand scheme of things, in the grand scheme of the work that you're doing for someone, is not actually going to be that important. And that if you overcorrect, if you move too quickly to respond, quite frankly, it might just go away itself, or it might not be impactful, or it can just be swatted away. But then from that point of view, you need to figure out whether there is, whether you're just going to monitor the situation and see if that situation is going to get worse or better. And then conversely, if you've decided to move forward, how you move forward, how you do your politics correctly, who you appropriately talk to in your coalitions to help you defend yourself. And so basically, laying out this really broad process of structure where you go step by step until ultimately what you're doing is monitoring an evolving situation and changing your tactics according to what happens.
Okay. Now, Tom and Brad, you've both co-founded or founded your own firms. Can you talk about that decision and experience of running things from an entrepreneurial perspective? And then, Mischa, I imagine that'll contrast a lot with working for such a large worldwide firm after they go. I'm sure you can give students who might end up in that sort of work environment a little insight into how things run in an organization like APCO.
Tom, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I ended up starting my own firm sort of by accident. I had come to the end of things at Got Milk. I will say this, there's a lot of talk about entrepreneurs and serial entrepreneurs and all that. For me, I was none of those things. I was just a guy enjoying the work. And then I decided to leave Got Milk, and I needed something new to do and had kids in college and whatever. And somebody said, hey, there's this niche and you have a lot of qualifications for how industry groups come together. And it just struck me that it was the best marketing job that I could have in Washington without leaving and going to Chicago or, you know, New York or someplace else. And the person who suggested it to me was a perfect partner. And I said, well, that is a good idea. Why don't we just start? And so we did. But it really was, and then I will just say this. It's great having a small firm and running it. I enjoy it a lot. But to me, it's just about the work. And if I have interesting work to do and interesting clients to work on, I could do it for somebody or I can do it for myself. I'm probably too old now to do it for somebody else because, you know, I can't get fired anymore. But anyway, but it's to me, it's about the work. Anyway, go ahead, Brad.
No, I want to echo a lot of what Tom said. I think that a little bit of this was kind of accidental. In fact, Fireside campaigns, you know, we do integrated communications across PR, digital strategy, ads, et cetera, for just all sorts of progressives. It's only about 2 years old. And from the point of view at which I kind of started the firm, much like Tom, which was kind of like accidentally, we kind of grew exponentially. We went from like me and 2 associates to me and 10 associates to me and 3 partners and 35 associates. And like over the course of 2 years, it was more like me just kind of putting my head down and doing my work for my PR side, my partners doing the same for their digital clients. And then all of a sudden we're in a partner meeting about a month ago going, oh my God, we've tripled the size of this firm and our revenue stream in literally 1 year. Frankly, a year before I had founded Fireside Campaigns, I was kind of talking with my wife about whether or not I just wanted to go all in on trying to get a position with a presidential campaign, and decided to just give this firm thing a try. And then we ended up senior advisors to Andrew Yang's presidential campaign anyway. That is to say, and I think that folks need to kind of remember this, your career arc, your story arc in Washington, D.C., in a lot of ways is not going to be anything like you think it's going to be. You know, the whole idea that there are rungs up a ladder and that you're just going to kind of go up those rungs and check the boxes along the way is not actually how it works. And life kind of throws you for a loop. And then all of a sudden you kind of look back after a year and go, whoa, what just happened here? I was thinking about going to get a gig and now I'm sitting on top of this really large firm, you know, for DC standards. And so it really kind of just like, leave yourself open to that sort of level of possibility that things are going to kind of evolve in ways that you're just not going to necessarily get.
Yeah, working for a big firm is definitely a little bit different. We have 800 employees at this point across 26 different offices around the world. So as you can imagine, there's definitely, you know, a lot of multiculturalism. There's different cultures within every office. But the nice part is that APCO is very interconnected. I was very lucky before my current role. I used to lead the internal communications for the entire firm globally. So I was in charge of kind of making sure we had good internal campaigns, that you know, the information was trickling down. And something that I learned that I think really speaks to working at a big firm is that from the beginning, you need to make sure that you're making connections with the right people. So for example, in my previous role, my first month, all I did was get to know people on different teams. So I had calls scheduled with managing directors in Southeast Asia, in Europe, in the Middle East, all over the world, just because I wanted to understand what their challenges are, what their goals are, what their desires are, where they want to see the firm go. And I think for people who are more interested in kind of like big firms, something to remember is that at a small firm and a smaller team, I think it can be a lot easier to get noticed, where at a bigger firm, you kind of really have to like work hard to make sure that you're showing your impact and you're showing kind of like what you're doing and how it's making the firm better. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, if you're working at a big firm, you definitely want to make sure you're developing relationships with potential mentors internally, people who can give you direction and recommendations on where you should be going. And, you know, a lot of these people have been in your spot before, so they really know. And a lot of times, I would say 99% of the time, these people have your best interests in mind, and they want to see you succeed. And that kind of goes even beyond big firms. In DC, relationships are so important. So, you know, if you're going to a big firm that has like 40 interns a semester or 30 interns a semester, like make sure you write a handwritten thank you note at the end, kind of make yourself stand out in any way possible. And obviously work hard, but also try to make an impact on the people you're working with. So that's kind of my little piece of advice on working with big firms.
Hey,
You
Mischa,
mentioned
can I add
internships.
something to that though?
Yeah.
Because I think the other thing I think about too, and I had this experience at J. Walter Thompson, and Bradley, I suspect there's some places where you had a similar thing, which is sometimes earlier in your career, a big firm can be great because they have the big clients who have the money to do things the best and smartest ways. And so it's a little bit like grad school. You know, you get to get out of college, you get to go to a big firm, you see how the serious people do it when they have serious budgets. It's like if you go to a small ad agency right out of college, the problem there is none of the clients can afford the research or the analytics. And so you're in a room full of very bright people who are doing it the best they can, but they're making stuff up. And that's not the same as the kind of work that we've been talking about today. And so one of the advantages early on of a big firm, no matter where you end up, is, but it can be a small firm. You just need to work someplace where they're really smart and the clients are important enough or big enough to do it the smart way and the right way, to be, so you have a big learning opportunity. And that seems to me to be really important.
Yeah, and just to add one more thing, a lot of and some smaller firms do that too, but a lot of the big firms, they have really robust internship programs. So it's not just like helping on a project that's going on, but you have lunch and learns, you have a mentor you're paired up with. So there's really a lot of advantage to working at a big firm. I previously worked at smaller firms where I was in a communications department, and you definitely learn a lot, but the nice part, like Tom said, is like you have the budget to really like do things right. Like you don't have to skip the research process. Your creative team can have more than one example of what the campaign could look like, because the budgets are just bigger a lot of times, and that's definitely a huge advantage. And for junior employees, once you kind of enter those big firms, like I know Ogilvy, us, and then I think Edelman just started these programs where you do a rotation in different departments. So from the start, you get to see like, okay, maybe I'm passionate about crisis, or maybe, you know, I never thought healthcare was my thing, but let me try it out. So that's one of the big advantages, where if you're going to a very small niche firm, like it's awesome if you really know what you want to be doing. Like if you want to do progressive communications, there's like, you know, 5 or 6 firms in DC that everybody wants to work at. Or if you want to do trade associations, like there's definitely firms that specialize in that, and go there. Like if you know at 22 that this is for sure what you want to do, then more power to you. But if you don't, that's okay. And then you have the big firms where you can go kind of figure things out.
And here's the other thing that I will say on this. You know, They have it exactly right, Tom and Michelle do. The truth is that every experience that you have at a large firm or at a larger entity or at a large campaign is going to teach you the ways that you can then create efficiencies for smaller projects that you yourself are going to direct in your mid-career that lead you to success in your later career. Learn the way the big guys do things and then apply those lessons to the clients that you get along the way. That's it. It is the way to success.
I'm so happy this is veered into career advice. That's really the main reason we set these up, and we have some impressive students here today to receive this advice. For those monitoring the chat, we have students who are already working for human rights NGOs, for grassroots political organizations. It's fantastic. And we even have a guest from outside of the FIU community who found us on LinkedIn, who's a graduate of a school in Belgium, interning here in DC right now. So great audience, and they have great questions. One question is about ethics and one's about the pandemic, two questions that I failed to include. So I'm going to see if Crescente is still around to ask their question about
yeah.
ethics.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I have this question. So I've been researching about this topic, subliminal advertising, how it's been used like sometimes in history, sometimes for unethical reasons. But I mean, mostly, like, at least what I've researched, like, all times it has been used for like unethical reasons. But I wanted to know if is it possible to use subliminal advertising, like, to promote an idea, but like, in an ethical way?
Can I go first?
Sure.
I think the whole theory of subliminal advertising is just nonsense. I've been around a lot of campaigns. I've worked with some of the smartest people in the business. There's nobody trying to figure out how to put penises in ice cubes. It's just now.
No, but
wait. That being said, though, you are actually onto something I think is really important. It's not so much subliminal advertising, but one of the things I think we see now in the Trump era is I no longer have to persuade people of this, which is if your facts and information and arguments aren't tied to the deeply held personal values of people, they will ignore your facts and arguments. They will vote against their own self-interest. They will do things that rational people think are crazy and stupid. Because if you're not tied to people's fundamental, deeply held beliefs and values, they will ignore your facts and substitute their own from the internet or from any idiot in the world. And so I don't think there is. I think subliminal advertising was a book written back in the 50s or 60s, and then various academics have followed it up. I just don't think it exists. I've worked with. I'm really old. I've worked with a lot of organizations and groups. I've never been in a meeting where anybody talked about subliminal advertising, and I've been in 1,500,000 meetings. Now, that being said, this notion of tying messaging to people's deeply held values is so important. And we use a lot of our clients, a kind of research called means end theory research. It's not enough to just look at a survey and see, oh, we're better at this and they're worse at this. Let's talk about that. That's not tying to people's deeply held values. You have to really, and so that research technique is a pretty interesting. It was actually most famously done for Ronald Reagan and rather successfully. But anyway, so that's what I would say is here's a great example. We did some work on vaccination, anti-vaxxers and people who are pro-vaccine. Here's the reality. The most deeply held values tied to both sets of those parents are being a good parent and doing the right thing for their kids. So if you talk to anti-vaxxers and tell them they're bad parents and they're idiots and they don't understand science, you're going to lose because they are trying desperately, just as desperately as the rest of us, to do the right thing and be a good parent. And so if you can't understand what are the steps they get through attributes and benefits and emotions to that value, then you can't persuade them to change their behavior. And there's a ton of research about this. Brendan Nehan, a professor, I can't remember where, has done some brilliant research on this that shows if you argue the facts with anti-vaxxer parents, and then they admit you're right, and they admit they're wrong, and then you later go back and say you're going to vaccinate your children, they still say no.
That's right.
And it's because you're not tying your facts and information to deeply held personal values. So if I were you, I would ignore subliminal advertising, and I would jump on this notion of how do you, because that's the subliminal part. Values are not things. Nobody runs an ad saying, want to be a good parent, and if they do, it's a terrible ad.
Two things to follow up that I believe Tom totally hit on the right thing is, number one, it doesn't matter if it's ethical or not. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And the newest body of evidence around subliminal advertising is that subliminal advertising simply doesn't work. The brain just simply does not function in the way that people who had forwarded the research in the 50s and 60s thought that it worked as. And so, quite frankly, dumping money into things like subliminal advertising is just, quite frankly, a waste of money. Now, to Tom's other point, what subliminal advertising really is that nobody will remember what you said. They will only remember how it made them feel. Feels determine how folks view the world right now at a time when nothing else will. Repeated emotional impression, repeatedly making folks feel that no matter what it is you're trying to get them to understand, that you feel the way that they do is the path to success. And what you will see is that the lightest touch that you make in terms of making somebody feel and emotionally connect with the things that you're trying to connect with are what are actually driving folks to either accept something that you're saying to them or otherwise change their minds on things. So to Tom's point and to your point about how the brain works and getting to understand how you are to influence somebody's brain, it is with emotional appeal, not facts and figures.
Yeah. Makes sense. Thank you. I mean, although it actually makes sense. I hadn't seen it that way. But what I there was a part about this that is about the psychology of communications, which, the colors, that is used in advertising, nowadays, even the colors, how some colors, attract you more. I found that very interesting. I don't know, just.
No, it is. It's fascinating. And I will tell you, in a lot of the work that I do with the pro-voter space, right now, the way that we are training folks how to communicate, it is around the different places of the brain and how they receive information. We live in a time period of crisis where people carry with them deep anxieties around the world, and that the portion of the brain that makes decisions around those anxieties are what trigger people in order to accept certain things that they wouldn't naturally accept if they weren't thinking about the world in terms of crises. And so what we have done is that we've used the understanding that we have around the way the different centers of the brain process information in order to move people out of a fight and flight mode, out of this sense of looming crisis, and into a place where they're more receptive to saying things like, yeah, you know what? I shouldn't have to choose between the health of my family and my right to vote. And that's why you see 70, 80% of voters around supporting vote by mail, even though the president is attacking vote by mail. We didn't make a facts and figures argument. What we actually said was no American should have to choose between their health and their voice in our society. And so vote by mail is winning.
Thank you, and thanks, Vicente, for the question. We have a few other interesting ones. We're gonna try to get as many as we can and get some quick answers to them. Valentina, you still around?
Yes. Hello. First, thank you all for being here. This panel has been really, really informative. I have a two-part question, so I'll just read it off the screen. Because this field is so reliant on sustained communication with clients as projects develop, have you adapted to the changing dynamics that are brought on by the pandemic? And are there certain things that you've learned or tactics you've developed throughout the way that you might continue to use once normalcy is restored? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, Valentina. Thank you for asking. I'll definitely say the nice thing for us, it wasn't too shocking when we had to go to fully digital because we've been using Zoom, for the past 3 years. I learned yesterday that we're actually the third customer or like the fourth customer Zoom had. So it's not that dramatically different, but for example, not being able to have dinners with clients, not being able to bring in a client for a brainstorm and kind of do it in person and inspire them more has definitely been a challenge. I will say, however, I feel like because of the pandemic and because we're all digital, we've become a lot more human. And it's not so much like transactional, like, oh, they're going to come into the office. I have to act super formal, super official all the time. In fact, it's kind of nice because now, oh, my client has a baby. I hear them in the background and I understand, okay, well, here's some things that I can connect on with this client. I can ask her about her family. I can ask her about these things that sometimes would be a little bit less apparent or less, they will feel less professional, I guess. So I feel like I hope that with the pandemic, we kind of stay on this journey of like, we're all humans. Work is important, but so is like our personal life. And it's okay to kind of integrate them and not, I think we've moved way past people shaming people for not wearing a blazer on Zoom or for not, being really, really formal. And I really like that. And with clients, we've adapted. We know how to do brainstorms on Zoom now. We know how to like help out clients in more tactical ways. Face-to-face communication for me with my clients has actually increased because of those, formal boundaries that have kind of been broken. They'll just tell me, they'll be like, I know you're at home, but like, let me give you a call. And I think it's easier. And I actually really like, in terms of like digital transformation, what has happened, unfortunately, due to a horrible, deadly pandemic, but we've been trying to get there for so many years. And I feel like we're at a point where every single client knows how to use Zoom. They know how to mute themselves, like these little things that would really hurdle meetings in the past are just no longer an issue. So I hope we kind of stay on the more, you're a human, I'm a human. You don't need to be super formal with me. We can find ways to connect and be very honest with each other, more honest than we were before the pandemic.
Thank you.
Awesome. I think Camila's question seems very relevant to the kind of DC policy context. Camila, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, for sure. Hello. I didn't present myself. I'm an international relations student. And one of the first concepts that introduced communications in this realm was the concept of manufacture of consent. And my question would be, like, I would like to know, what is your view on manipulating the negative facts that affect the idea that you have to promote? How do you use those facts on your favor, or in what ways do you use them to create the idea that you do want to promote? I don't know if it's
I'll lead this one off because I actually sat in the center of an early version of this. To bring you back to 2017, I was brought on to assist the family of Seth Rich, a murdered DNC staffer who became the center of a series of conspiracy theories where lots of folks surrounding the president decided that they were going to try and use this fact in order to distract or otherwise to change the narrative around Russian interference in our elections. I can't express enough how not only dangerous this development is worldwide, but also how dangerous it is for even folks on my side to think that this somehow the ends justify the means in terms of kind of using the manipulation of negative facts or otherwise casting a doubt on a shared sense of reality and what that means in terms of our ability to be honest brokers in society. we need a grasp of reality in order for society to function. And we need to agree as to the facts of what that reality is in order to actually have a real debate in a functioning democracy. And it is my belief that as we continue down a path where we enter a space of not knowing where reality is moored, that we are entering a place where democracy itself will not be able to appropriately function. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, no matter where we sit on the political spectrum, to really do everything that we can to work with folks on the other side in order to find shared facts, in order to find a space where there is something that serves as a bedrock of understanding, so that we don't devolve to a place where everyone is just continuously susceptible to being manipulated.
Brad, I would add to that, I guess, in this way. I think I agree with everything you said, of course. So when we look at our values ladders and stuff, we look at them sometimes from a positive and a negative perspective. And both are useful. Mostly, we're working up a positive ladder. We're promoting the value of an idea or a concept or a piece of legislation or a product or whatever. And you're not going to use negative facts in that context. There are times when you're trying to defeat something, when you want to kill a piece of legislation or whatever, where you have to truly understand the nature of the risk it presents to people, and you have to effectively communicate that risk to them. And then you're working on the negative side of that ladder. You're essentially saying, if this happens, here are the consequences as you will understand them and as they mean something to you. And so I think it's a set of tools. Now, can any of our tools, positive or negative, can be used irresponsibly? And I'm not sure that, look, you can be irresponsible and despicable with negative or positive stories. That's you decide whether or not how to act morally in the universe. But I think the negative side of understanding how things affect people is an important tool if you're especially in the policy side of the house, not quite as much in the marketing and selling side, but certainly in the policy side.
I certainly don't disagree with that, Tom. And I think this harkens specifically back to what I said about a shared version of reality. In order for negative or positive persuasion to work, people need to have a shared understanding of what's good and what's bad in the first place. And I think that is more of what I'm speaking to, that we need to view a set of moral decisions as moral decisions and not through relativism, in order to allow for both positive and negative messaging to play out in the marketplace of ideas in a way where people can make decisions for themselves as to just what level they're willing to accept in a product that might be on the balance good, but might, have some deleterious effects, or a candidate who might have done some bad earlier in their career, but on the whole might sound like, they're okay.
Thank you so much.
This has been a fantastic hour, and we're almost at the end here. Well, that was the last full question we'll get to do, but I did see there was even a question in here about being a competitive applicant for strategic comms firm. I'm going to ask each panelist to give one final piece of advice to one or the other, to a student who wants to work in communications, or to a student who's not necessarily looking for a communications career, but is in the advocacy space and wants to be a better communicator. I'm also going to ask Brad to show his cat a little more clearly if he's looking around, because it look cute. Final closing advice.
When you're applying for internships, look closely at the job description. And I know it takes a long time, but if you can kind of alter your resume to reflect some of the things that they're looking for, that's always a big plus. Because let's say if I'm looking for someone who has previously written press releases and you've done that, and it's one of the job descriptions says, drafting press releases, and I see it on your resume, you're automatically, in my eyes, I associate you with someone who knows how to do things. I will say the other advice is network. DC is just, you've heard stories about how people get asked to, like Brad today, talked about helping Andrew Yang's campaign. And that's so common in DC because you cross paths with people, and later in life when you become successful and you're good at what you do, they will ask you to come back. So when you're interning, don't, take things for granted. Go the extra mile. For our interns, I asked them to grab a coffee a week with someone. Every week they have to grab coffee with someone new in the office. You never know who's going to be helpful or useful in the future. And when you're applying, don't be afraid to reach out to alumni in the area or someone who has the kind of job you want to have. Reach out to them and just ask them for an informational interview or a coffee. And I guarantee you, most people in DC are going to say yes, because especially in the communications industry, people love talking about themselves. And if you're going in there being like, I want to hear about you, I want to learn about how you've done this, done that, they will take that opportunity and they will feel like they're making a positive difference. So 3 things. Make sure your resume and your writing samples reflect what the job is looking for. Also, always add, like a letter or whatever, if you can attach one to your application. And number 2, network with the people once you get the internship. And number 3, don't be afraid to reach out to people when you're applying who have the job you want or who went to FIU. It's such a huge school that I'm sure you'll be able to find plenty of alumni in the DC area or wherever that can help you out. So those are my 3 pieces of advice.
I would say this. I think many of you have worked really hard to build your resumes to get into college, and then, while you're there and doing all these things. At the end of the day, though, the advice I would give in terms of interviews is this. I'm often impressed by people's resumes, and it's great that people show initiative and have done a lot of things, but you're not there to say, look at all this experience I have, I'm going to be great for this. The thing you can do in an interview is demonstrate intellectual curiosity, the ability to think in interesting ways, because that's hard to find, and that you can have even without 20 years of experience. And that's something that is harder to find than you think and really valuable. So demonstrating intellectual curiosity and demonstrating your ability to think through issues, even if you're not quite sure of the answer, is really, for me, the big trigger in an interview that there's someone really interesting there.
And for those of you who are thinking about political communications very specifically, the thing that I would advise you to do is to take your 20s and really explore power dynamics in terms of what power actually means. Think of it as a currency and learn how power translates from person to person, from entity to entity. And the best way to really get a good guidepost for this is to try and accrue as many different experiences as you can on the campaign side, on the Hill, and in issue advocacy. Try to build a resume that shows that you understand how power is translated from those 3 different power centers so that you get as good a grasp of how you can help clients later on in your career push and pull at each of those individual things as you can in order to achieve the outcomes that your clients need from a legislative perspective or a political perspective.
Tom, Mischa, Brad, thank you all so much. This has been one of the events I've been looking forward to the most, even since before I reached out to the 3 of you and knowing what great contacts we have in this space. And it's been at all of my expectations in terms of the insights and comments and advice you've all given. Also, so appreciative of all of the students who were here today. Great turnout, great questions. I'm going to go into the rest of my workday quite happy, and I thank you all so much. And we look forward to staying in touch, and definitely you all know you can send me internships, opportunities, events that you think our students should go to, and we'll get those distributed. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, you too. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.